Are you ready to paint this vanity with me? All right, we're going to walk through this, but I'm going to tell you that the reason why this vanity has never been painted, this is my rental property, is because over the years since we bought it in 2005, it's gone through a number of tenants, and I've just never had the opportunity to go in there and do these kind of projects. Well, my mom and my nephew live there now, and so having family live there allows me to get in there and do some of these projects that I just didn't have time to do when other people were living there. So for this project, we're going to be using Fusion Mineral Paint. This is a paint that I like. I do like that it has a built-in top coat, but a lot of these furniture paints can be very expensive. And I did tell you in a recent video for Bathroom Week, this half bathroom of mine, I painted Cabana Blue, which was amazing and vibrant, but it's not a special paint. It's just a regular Bayer wall latex paint. But the difference is that to make it a chalk paint, I added something called BB Frosh, which is the powder additive that can really turn any regular paint into a chalk paint. So you can do that and save a lot of money. You don't have to use a specialty paint for painting your bathroom vanity, and it will give a nice consistency to the paint, and you won't have to sand or prime because it does grip that surface nicely. And the only difference though is when you make your own chalk paint, you see here that I added some furniture wax. You will have to wax it to protect it. But with Fusion Mineral, no top coat needed. Even Beyond Paint that I've used before, no top coat needed. All right, so the first step was to remove the hardware. I'm actually going to be reusing those. As ugly as they are, I don't have any new knobs yet. I will tell you to remove your doors. In previous videos when I've painted things, I've left the hardware on there, and don't do it. It ends up getting really messy. Just set them aside and paint them, or you're going to clean them first, but just set them aside and do it separately. Now, cleaning your vanity is going to be really important. So you can use a vinegar and water mix. You can use Simple Green, but make sure you get off any toothpaste or soap scum, anything that may have just splashed onto your vanity. Now, I wish that I had more space to do this project. I didn't, so I ended up taking just some brown paper, cleaning and painting things on the floor there in the bathroom, and it worked out fine. It was a little slippery though, so be very careful if you're putting anything down on top of that tile. Clean it, let it thoroughly dry, and then we can get started with painting. If you're a messy painter, be sure to put some painter's tape around so you don't just get paint everywhere. But look at the brush that I'm using. I love using angled brushes because if you've got a steady hand, you can really get close to an edge with that angle and get a nice clean cut in without having to do painter's tape. I think it does save you a little bit of time if you can do that. If you can't, then go ahead and put painter's tape everywhere. It's better to just put tape than to have to go back and clean up all the paint that you got all over the wall. It's also important to try to do nice long strokes, and this can be problematic depending on where your vanity is. I kept hitting the shower because it was kind of close, and I didn't even show you the other side of the vanity where I could barely even get the paintbrush in there. So if you want to use a roller, by all means use a roller. I just like using paintbrushes because sometimes it can be easier for me. All right, so painting along the edges. I want to give you a little tip here for painting along edges. This is something I discovered years ago, because what can happen is when you are using a paintbrush on a slim edge like this, you want to fan the paintbrush out. You notice that I'm starting in the middle and I'm fanning it out towards the edge. You see here at the bottom, I'm also doing the same thing where I'm starting in the middle and fanning those bristles out towards the edge. That's how you prevent getting all of that paint on that white part inside of the cabinet. That's how you prevent drips and you prevent buildup of paint, and it just makes it a little cleaner. So I'm going to pull out a video that I did years before. Notice how my bristles are going on the opposite direction, but see all that paint that's collecting on top? That's what could happen when you're painting, whether it's furniture or a vanity edge. And the same is true for when you're doing a small edge like this. If you're running your paintbrush in this direction, you have all of that paint that's building up. So notice how I'm fanning the brush over the edge, smoothing the paint out, and it creates a nice clean edge. And again, if you notice, this is what I'm doing with this vanity. It prevents it from getting really messy, and I think it also prevents you from not having to tape off as many parts. So just a little tip when you're doing edges, when you're painting furniture or vanities. I did put a little bit of painter's tape on the bottom where that quarter round is. it's kind of hard to paint along a floor and quarter round. I didn't have very much painter's tape left, so I kept reusing the same and then going from section to section, painting that off. And this is just the first coat. You definitely want to do 2 coats of whatever furniture paint, whether it's store-bought, whether it's a chalk paint that you've made yourself. Do 2 coats, and it just looks much better. So while the vanity was drying, I was ready to move on to the next step. Now, if you do have the space to do these in your garage or some other place, that's great. Or you can just lie a piece of paper out and paint them there. I started with the back, smushing the paint into those cracks and crevices, and I was going to let them dry thoroughly and then rehang them and paint the fronts. And the reason why is because I didn't want, while the paint was still drying, I didn't want to flip them over onto the paper and then risk the paint drying onto the paper. And, then it's just another nightmare because now you have to peel the paper off of the paint. So I did 1 coat on the backs, and then once those were dry, then it was time to hang them. But first, I want to point out something here that's really important. When you open up paint, it's generally this consistency, and over time, it can start, while you're working on a project, it can start to get really thick. And then you can add a little bit of water, but if you add too much water, it can get runny like this. Now, I will tell you, and I'll show you in just a moment, how you'll know that your paint is getting a little too thick. But if you add a little bit of water, it does start to smooth the paint out just a little bit, but don't add too much. Now, when these were dry, the backs, I wanted to rehang them so that I could paint the fronts while they were hanging. And I will point out that make sure you know which cabinet goes where, because I did make the mistake of hanging a couple of these cabinets upside down, and where the hardware needed to be attached was at the bottom. So when I reattached it, I did 2 coats. Well, I ended up doing 2 coats while the cabinet was hanging. And this, in my opinion, allowed me to get a smooth finish without having to worry about any of the wet paint sticking to that paper, the brown paper on the floor. This is about where my camera started to die. So I didn't get a lot of painting on the front of the cabinets, but you get the idea of what I did. Now let's take a look at what these cabinets look like before. And it looked so much nicer afterwards. I, again, had to use the same hardware because we didn't have time to go to Lowe's to get new hardware, which we will update this with gold. And that cabinet to the left, you can see some streaks on there. That's because the paint started to get a little thick. So when I go back to this property to see my mom, I'm going to thin the paint just a little bit and do another really final coat. But look how dramatic this is. Doesn't this look good? So if you've got an old cabinet in your bathroom, you don't want to replace it, you don't have the money to replace it, just do some paint. It actually gives it a whole new look, and you've saved a lot of money. Get some new hardware like we will be doing. And be sure to come back because this is bathroom week, and I am showing you in the premiere the before and after of my friend's bathroom makeover. You're not going to believe it. So I want you to come back for that live watch party, and I will see you next video.